Hello, everyone. Welcome to the California Department of Education's Antibias Education Grant Program application webinar. My name is Cheryl Cotton, and I serve as Deputy Superintendent of the Instruction, Measurement, and Administration Branch of the CDE. On behalf of Tony Thurman, our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, we are grateful for your interest in this grant in order to make our school communities more welcoming, equitable, and inclusive. The goals of the Antibias Education Grant include preventing, addressing, and eliminating racism and bias in all California public schools and making all public schools inclusive and supportive of all people. This grant will be used for training and resources to prevent and address bias or prejudice toward any group of people based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, immigration status, language, or any actual or perceived characteristic. Emphasis shall be on preventing bias or prejudice towards groups, including but not limited to African Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, Latinos, and people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning youth, as well as addressing anti-Semitism. The grant program seeks to provide professional support to educators to develop skills and competencies to interrupt and eliminate bias by activating changes to structures, processes, and practices that, when implemented, will make a real difference in the educational experience and outcome for students. We're excited for the opportunity to partner with the National Equity Project, whose mission is to transform the experiences, outcomes, and life options for children and families who have been historically underserved by institutions and systems. Lisa Lasky, the Managing Director for the National Equity Project, is joining us this afternoon. She will share more about the organization and how they'll be supporting the Antibias Education Grant recipients. Now I'd like to turn it over to Julia Agostinelli, Education Program Consultant in the Professional Learning and Innovations Office, to share important details about this grant opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the Antibias Education Grant Program. This technical assistance webinar is provided by the Educator Excellence and Equity Division at the California Department of Education, or CDE for short. My name is Julia Agostinelli. I'm an Education Programs Consultant in the Professional Learning Innovations Office. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Terry Jackson and Lisa Fassett. And as Cheryl mentioned, also joining us today is Lisa Lasky from the National Equity Project. And CDE is partnering with the National Equity Project to support the work of its grant. Please note that the webinar is being recorded. At this time, all webinar participants have been placed on mute. As questions arise during the webinar, please type your questions in the chat box or question and answer box. We'll do our best to answer those questions during the questions and answers portion of this webinar. The PowerPoint with the notes will be available on the CDE Antibias Education Grant Program webpage at www.cde.ca.gov/ps/antibiasgrant.asp. The Anti-Bias Education Grant Program funding was established by Assembly Bill 130, Chapter 44, Section 157 of the 2021-22 California State Budget. The law requires that the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, or SSPI for short, award a minimum of 50 grants to local educational agencies, or LEAs for short. Funds are available for expenditure or encumbrance through 2025-2026 fiscal year. For the 2021-22 fiscal year, the sum of $10 million was appropriated from the general fund to the SSPI. The SSPI shall award a minimum of 50 grants to LEAs, and an LEA shall not receive a grant of less than $75,000 and no more than $200,000. Again, these funds are available for expenditure or encumbrance through 2025-26 fiscal year. However, LEAs may expend all anti-bias education grant program funds early. Please note that regardless of whether funds are expended early, LEAs must commit to participating in the 4 community of practice convenings, and we'll share more about that later. And please note that just a couple of weeks ago on June 30th, 2022, AB 181, Section 138 of the Education Omnibus Budget Trailer Bill was chaptered. The legislation appropriates $10 million for the 2022-23 fiscal year for the Anti-Bias Education Grant Program. The CDE may utilize this competitive grant process to award this additional $10 million. The 2022-23 funding also requires that the SSPI award a minimum of 50 grants to LEAs. Please visit the CDE Anti-Bias Education webpage for updates on this funding. The purpose of the Anti-Bias Education Grant Program is to prevent, address, and eliminate racism and bias in all California public schools, making all public schools inclusive and supportive of all people. The grant program seeks to provide professional support to educators to develop skills and competencies to interrupt and eliminate bias by activating changes to structures, processes, and practices that, when implemented, will make a real difference in the educational experiences and outcomes of students. Anti-Bias Education Grant Program funds may be used for training and resources to prevent and address bias or prejudice toward any group of people based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, immigration status, language, or any actual or perceived characteristic listed in Section 422.55 of the Penal Code. Emphasis shall be on preventing anti-Semitism and bias or prejudice toward groups, including but not limited to African Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, Latinos, and people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning youth. Allowable activities for the Anti-Bias Education Grant may include, but are not limited to any of the following: professional development on topics that address hate, bigotry, racism, or any form of bias or prejudice, including but not limited to design features of equitable learning environments, classroom management techniques, emotional wellness and self-regulation, and strategies designed to increase teachers' skills for mitigating bias, fostering caring developmental relationships, and practices and approaches when managing pupils in academic and disciplinary settings to support deep and engaged learning. Additionally, grant funds may be used for opportunities for teachers, administrators, pupils, other school staff, and members of the governing board or body of the LEA to review policies, practices, and procedures that can promote bias, such as referrals for discipline, special education, and course placement, and to update those policies, practices, and procedures to foster in pupils a sense of belonging and connection. The development or updating of a comprehensive bias mitigation or diversity plan based on the identified needs of the LEA using its data and tied to specific outcomes, such as increasing diversity or more racially proportionate pupil discipline referrals. Curriculum that is appropriate for pupils in kindergarten or any of the grades 1 through 12, inclusive of topics that address hate, bigotry, racism, or any form of bias or prejudice. Promote self-love, self-acceptance, and pride in one's multiple identities, understanding of one's own and others' cultural histories and contributions, and empathy for and meaningful connections with others. And lastly, support of pupil-initiated and pupil-led efforts to combat hate, bigotry, racism, or any form of bias or prejudice, and to co-design new approaches to mitigate bias and foster a sense of belonging and connection, and to ensure that decisions, actions, and designs are informed by student voice, needs, and aspirations. Professional development and curriculum for the Antibias Education Grant Program shall use evidence-based strategies. For the purposes of this grant, the CDE has borrowed the following definition for evidence-based practice. As defined by the Every Student Succeeds Act, an evidence-based practice is an activity, strategy, or intervention that demonstrates a statistically significant effect on improving outcomes or other relevant outcomes based on strong evidence, moderate evidence, promising evidence, or a rationale with ongoing efforts to examine the effects of activity, strategy, or intervention. For additional guidance and strategies for building equitable learning environments and centering student experience in school improvement efforts using evidence-based tools, visit the Building Equitable Learning Environments, or BELL for short, Equitable Learning Library at https://library.bellnetwork.org. Grounded in the pillars of the Bell Network, these resources describe the changes and processes needed to create supportive, engaging, and caring environments for students and adults to learn and thrive. The Bell framework may be found on the Bell Network Framework webpage at https://bellnetwork.org/library_the-bell-framework. And now I'd like to introduce Lisa Lasky from the National Equity Project, or NEP for short, to share more information about the NEP organization and how they'll be supporting grantees with this project.
Thank you, Julia. Good Friday afternoon, everyone. It is our great honor and delight to be partnering with CDE to design and offer a system of learning and support for participants in this program over the next period of time. Our organization, the National Equity Project, is a multiracial leadership development organization with equity at the center of everything we do. We're a systems change organization committed to developing people's capacity, people such as yourselves, capacity to achieve thriving, self-determining, educated and just communities. And our mission, as Cheryl referenced at the beginning, is to literally change and transform the experiences, outcomes, life options for our young people and families who have been historically underserved, not served, and indeed harmed by many of our institutions and systems, school being just one of them. So we come to this effort with the having been witness for 27 years now, to everyday people learning, leading, and designing changes in their systems and organizations that transform experiences, particularly for those our most vulnerable young people, families, those furthest from opportunities. Next slide, please. Thank you. We have a core belief that we operate from, and we often would refer to folks such as yourself as rebel leaders, as equity leaders, and your charge, should you take it up, is to make the inequities in your systems, which are often invisible, visible, to disrupt harmful discourse practices and policies that perpetuate racialized outcomes, and imagine new ways of engaging and co-designing with and for your communities, so that each young person and adult can learn, develop, thrive, contribute, and experience a sense of belonging. That was a mouthful. That, in a nutshell, is what we're up to. That is why we're so excited to be a partner in this effort. And one of the things that we intend to do, here it comes, is co-design with our partners here at CDE, what we're calling a community of practice. And as you go about creating your plan and your response to the invitation for this grant, want you to please include in your participation in 4 convenings over the course of the next year plus. And when I say community of practice, think community, the part of this program which would invite you to be in community with other participants for shared reflection and shared learning and shared insight generation and insight sharing, insights about what you are learning as you go about your efforts to interrupt, mitigate the harmful effects of bias, and indeed eliminate bias. That's the community part, to be in community. The practice part, if you think about this as a place to practice, putting your insights and ideas out there for sharing, for collaborative learning, for thought partnership, right? And so we intend to design an experience and invite you in throughout the course of this project to do some of those things. One more, please. As I said, the community of practice will convene 4 times during the first 2 years of the grant. We very much want and hope we can make possible that the first convening be an in-person one, so that we can actually create this learning space together. And you get a chance to see who else is doing very similar work, might have similar problems, taking a different approach. So please, as you do your budgeting part of the application, to include some funds and assume that that first convening will be in person. So include some travel funds. For at least 1 team member, much better if it's 2 or 3 team members, right? And alternative funding sources could be used to fund that's expenses of an additional team member to attend and participate in these meetings. Location, as yet to be determined, but assume that there will be travel costs associated, perhaps even a flight. I think that's it. Yeah, Julia?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. The grant period is from January 2022 through March 30th, 2026. The CDE shall evaluate the grantee's performance and success. The Anti-Bias Education Grant Program recipients will comply with the reporting needs specified by the CDE. This may include data collection and analysis not proposed by the LEA throughout the expenditure period ending in 2026. Applicant eligibility is limited to LEAs defined as a school district, county offices of education, COE, or directly funded charter schools within the state of California that serves students in transitional kindergarten through grade 12. Applicants must demonstrate a need for additional anti-bias education and training and describe how the funds will be used. Community agencies, private schools, individual public schools, and state special schools are not eligible to apply for the Anti-Bias Education Grant Program. Now I'll talk about resources to support application development. The following slides are being highlighted to support LEA's development of the Antibias Education Grant Program application. CDE's Asset-Based Pedagogies webpage contains resources to support culturally sustaining pedagogy, culturally and linguistically responsive teaching, and culturally relevant pedagogy. Asset-based pedagogies focus on the strengths that diverse students bring to the classroom. It is a direct response to deficit-based models to education of the past. This webpage provides definitions and resources. The CDE's Research, Data, and Reports webpage contains research, data, and reports on supporting lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning LGBTQ+ students and improving overall school climate for LGBTQ+ students, their educators, and their families. The Supporting LGBTQ+ Students webpage contains instructional guidance, law, and policies for LEAs to support LGBTQ+ students and provide safe learning environments that protect the health and safety of LGBTQ+ students. The CDE published the Transformative Social and Emotional Learning, SEL, competencies in the spring of this year. They describe the knowledge, skills, dispositions, and capacities that children and young people can develop when the conditions are supportive to their healthy whole development. The CDE aims to support and advance the efforts of educators across California who are working to fully integrate systemic SEL and equity by building on the promise of transformative SEL as a concept. To provide these supports, the CDE has articulated developmental indicators for the 5 core SEL competencies. The California Transformative SEL competencies complement the California Transformative SEL Conditions for Thriving. The Conditions for Thriving provide recommended practices and actions that adults across the education system can use to co-create conditions that support transformative SEL development. Implement it thoughtfully and consistently, and in collaboration with leaders working at all levels of the education system. These practices and actions can support development of equity-focused learning environments in which children, youth, and adults have opportunities to practice, to develop and practice transformative SEL skills. The Quality Professional Learning Standards, QPLS, lay the foundation for creating a coherent set of professional learning policies and activities that span the career continuum of an educator, leading to improved educator knowledge, skills, and dispositions, and ultimately increased student learning results. The standards describe the criteria for quality professional learning and point educators and educational partners toward using evidence-based elements and indicators when making decisions about how to create and/or improve professional learning in their own systems. Links to these resources are provided on the resources slide toward the end of this presentation and also in the request for application RFA. Lastly, WestEd's Anti-Racist Evaluation Strategies, a guide for evaluation teams, contains strategies to conduct anti-racist evaluations. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Lisa Fassett.
you, Terry. The following slides address specific requirements of the Antibias Education Grant Program application. Submission requirements. Applicants must complete an electronic application available at www.cde.gov/PD/PS/antibiasgrant.asp. Online application instructions for the Antibias Education Grant Program are included in the appendix of the RFA. Respond to all sections of each prompt of the narrative description. Separately, attach supporting evidence such as budgets, assurances and certifications, and letters of commitment if applicable. Provide the appropriate digital signature. And finally, please submit the application by August 19th before 4 p.m. Refer to the scoring rubric for the Antibias Education Grant Program to understand how responses for each application will be evaluated by the reading panel. When saving responses, please note that you must select the Save Responses button on the first page of the online application if you do not intend to complete the application in one session. Once you select the Save Responses button, a page will appear that asks for your email address. You will receive an email with a unique URL or web address for entrance back into the application. Although you should receive the confirmation email, it is recommended that you copy the URL on the application page and save it. This address will allow you to return to your application. The application narrative is broken up into 6 parts. These include the executive summary, theory of action, demonstrated need and past anti-bias efforts, proposed activities, proposed metrics, and application budget. The application budget covers the entire grant period, which begins January 2023 and runs through March 2026. The proposed budget template is available on the Antibias Education Grant Program webpage. There are 6 tabs that need to be completed. 1 for the cover sheet, another tab for the budget summary, and 4 tabs for the budget narratives, 1 for each year of the grant. Only unlocked cells may be edited. The budget documents must be submitted as an Excel file through the online application. Please see the attachment instructions in the online application instructions section of the RFA. And please note that the budget will be reviewed and scored. The proposed budget detail must include a detailed budget narrative for each line item included in the grant period. The narrative should include how the proposed costs are necessary and reasonable in terms of grant activities, benefits to participants, and grant outcomes. Provide sufficient detail and a breakdown or calculation that justifies each line item. Group line items by the object code series and provide lines for object code totals. The proposed budget summary should provide totals for each object code and must align with the proposed budget detail. Please ensure that the budget includes funding for at least 1 team member to participate in an in-person community of practice convening. Other funding may be used to procure goods and services from the National Equity Project. However, due to the CDE's partnership with the National Equity Project, Antibias Education Grant Program funds may not be used to purchase National Equity Project goods nor services. Review process. Only fully completed applications will be considered eligible for consideration and advanced to the reader conference. A panel of readers selected for their expertise will read, review, and score each eligible application using a scoring rubric. The rubrics are found in the RFA. Points will be awarded based on quality, completeness, and responsiveness of the application to each of the required application components. Although scores are important, they are not the only factor when considered in selecting awards. Each section of the application has a specific amount of points, with each item in a section having a maximum point value. The executive summary has a total possible point value of 4. The theory of action has a total possible point value of 12 points. Demonstrated need and past anti-bias efforts is 20 points. Proposed activities is 24 points. Proposed metrics, 16 points. Budget and cost effectiveness comes in at 8 points. Please note that the CDE may request revisions to budgets. As a reminder, point values are not the only factors considered when selecting an awardee. Application timeline, some important dates. Upcoming deadlines include, so the RFA was released on July 1st, 2022. The application due date is August 19th, 2022 by 4 p.m. The intent to award will be posted on November 4th, 2022. The last day for appeals to be received by the CDE is November 18th, 2022 by 4 p.m. And final awards are to be posted on January 11th, 2023. Please note that this timeline is subject to change. The CDE Anti-Bias Education Grant Program webpage will be the most up-to-date place to find any changes that may occur to this timeline. And now let's take a moment to read over the questions. Any questions we've received in the Q&A?
Yes, we have a few. So the first question is that came in first was about charter schools. This individual says that there's probably like 6 charter schools, and should each of those charter schools apply for a grant, or should the operating, person of all 6 of the schools apply for a grant? How should they handle that? Or is this something that we need to get back to that individual?
Yeah, so directly funded charter schools are able to apply independently. If you work with a charter management organization and that charter management organization is considered the LEA, they would need to apply on behalf. And if you have questions about whether or not you're a directly funded charter school, you're welcome to send an email to our anti-bias email box, which will be we'll share a link at the very end of the presentation. And we can send you the link to determine that. We have a list on our CDE website.
Okay. The next question is, how will small districts with limited individual availability be able to compete with large districts?
So I will say that right now we are required to have at least 50 LEAs receive one of these grants. So we are not going by district size. So in that sense, you're not competing against other districts. Hope that answers your question.
Yes. And I was thinking when this question popped up also is just, if there's a need, if you have a need in your district, definitely apply for the grant. Should the additional funding sources for an expanded team be reflected in the budget /narrative?
So you could do it a couple of ways. If you are planning to use the Anti-Bias Education Grant Program funds, then you would definitely need to have it in the budget. But if you were planning to use other funds, you could still put it in the budget and indicate you'll be using a different source of funding for it, or it could just be mentioned in the narrative as well that you plan to send, a team of 5, but you'll be using other funds to do so.
I think there's 2 related questions. Someone came in late and was asking about a link to this presentation. I think it came up a couple of times. So that will be provided.
Yeah. So we'll send, what we'll do is we'll post the presentation slides with the notes as soon as possible. And then as we get the reporting cleaned up and ready to post, we'll post that also on our Antibias Education Grant Program webpage as well.
Okay. This person asked a couple of questions. One about, is the grant funded ADA or is it a flat grant, flat amount? And I think we answered it earlier, but we can repeat.
Okay. Yeah, so the funding, you could ask for whatever you need between $75,000 and $200,000. So whatever you determine your funding need is in that window, you apply for that.
Okay. Next, what are the reporting requirements? I believe we covered that in earlier about what will be needed. The CDE will ask for reporting for the grant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there will be reports probably quarterly that you will submit, and they'll be based on the data that you commit to sharing, how you plan to assess, how your grant is doing, as well as any data that we may specifically ask for.
Okay. What if we don't spend the money by 2026?
So if the requirement is that it be spent down by 2026, so we would expect that money, you plan for those funds to be spent by then.
Is there anything that needs to be approved by the board? I take it their local school board.
Yeah, so that would be up to, that's local control, and it would depend on what requirements your board wants to ensure before you apply for a grant, say, or any plans or changes you want to make with these funds would depend on what your local control.
The next question is about the proposed budget narrative. Is it embedded in the Excel sheet or submitted as a separate narrative doc?
Yeah, so when you pull up that Excel spreadsheet, you'll see all the different tabs at the bottom. And within each year of the grant, there is space based on object code on the left. And those cells expand so that you can add in maybe several sentences into the cell explaining what it is you're allocating those funds to. So you'd want to provide enough information that we can tie it to the narrative that you've provided in the rest of the application, but not so much narrative that it gets really long and is almost narrative itself. So, short paragraphs are usually sufficient.
The next person asked about, so are we limited on what services we may purchase and from whom? I think this might be in response to our partnership with the National Equity Project. Maybe confusion there.
Okay, so you are able to utilize the funds in the specific ways outlined in our legislation, which we have listed in our in our slides here. So the organization, the only caveat that we really have here is because we are working with the National Equity Project, and they are supporting us by providing communities of practice. You won't be able to use grant funds, our anti-bias education grant funds, to purchase services or products for them per se, but it would not prohibit you from using other types of funding to work with them. So that's really the only caveat we have there on that one.
Can funds be used to educate parents?
Yeah, definitely. If it is on the topic of the anti-bias education grant and supporting students and working to eliminate bias, then you know, working with parents is certainly part of that community aspect and important part of our school communities. If anyone else wants to jump in on our team to supplement what I say, I'm welcome to it.
You're doing a great job. And I know there's a couple of questions that are coming up about the money. I think we've answered the money, the $75,000 to $200,000, but there's questions coming up about, is that per year? And that's just the life of the grant.
Yeah, that's total.
That's total. And so if you want to spread that money over the 4 years, or you want to utilize that money within the first 1 or 2 years, that'll be a decision of your team.
Taking a look through the chat here.
Yes.
Yeah, it looks like we've gotten down to, can we charge indirect costs? Which, so, yes, you're able to charge indirect costs, the CDE approved indirect. And then the follow-up to that is there any weight given to the demographics of the LEA applying, level of diversity of the LEA?
Can you repeat that, Lisa? Say that one.
Yes. So first was, can we charge indirect costs, which is yes. And then, is there any weight given to the demographics of the LEA applying? And they have in parens, level of diversity of the LEA. And so it's not that there's weight necessarily given to demographics, but we are hopeful that applicants will apply from throughout the state, and we will be able to fund projects throughout the state. I hope that answers that question.
Right.
And then, to be sure that I am clear, part of our budget or allocation of funds must include one person attending the community of practice, or is this optional?
My understanding is that it's not optional. We want at least one person to attend those 4 convenings. And while I have the mic here, I'll answer another one that came up a little bit later. Can you explain the community of practice again? Is this something we create, or is it something that we will be invited to by an outside entity? So thank you for that question. The community of practice plan to meet 4 times over the course of 2 years. As I said, hopefully the first time will be in person. It is a space that the National Equity Project with our partners here at CDE will design for you, invite you in, and then together we will shape it and make it a space that is useful, you look forward to coming to. It's a space for reflection, sharing, shared accountability, insight generation, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, and then I see, when will the application be posted? The application was posted early this month, you can go to our Antibias Education Grant Program webpage on our CDE site. We'll say the hyperlink later on, again, if you need it. So it's there ready, the online link for the SNAP survey to fill out. All the responses to your questions is live as well. So you could turn in your application today if you wanted. And then someone,
No, go ahead.
Do we need to expend monies every year, or can we expend the $200,000 before 2026? So yes, you can expend the funds prior to 2026. You would just fill out the tabs for the years that you plan to spend it down. Just keep in mind, you will still be, if you wanted to say use that all in the first year, we would still require that you participate in the communities of practice. And also there might be some data collection we will require beyond the expenditure of funds.
No, we have a question. It says, I noticed students with disabilities are not named as a student group of focus because we have significant disproportionately, it seems an appropriate group. And that is actually covered. So in the RFA, in the law, the grant is to be used for training and resources to prevent and address bias or prejudice toward, and it does list specifically disability as one of the groups.
I see another question. I didn't notice anything specific to a grant project coordinator. Is it okay to spend grant dollars, for example, 10% FTE in the budget? So you're wondering if you can spend funding for a part-time person to coordinate. That is certainly a way you could spend funds. Someone asked how much should we estimate needing for the community of practice? So that is, you need to plan for at least one team member to travel to consider it. If you live in Southern California, maybe they'll need to fly up to Northern California. So include enough funding for a flight and possibly a hotel for the night. And we will hopefully have a location soon. As Lisa mentioned, it would be really fantastic bringing everyone together in person that first time. And there are 4 community practice meetings over the course of the grant period, so not in the first year. But it would be our hope to bring everyone together as soon as possible. All right. With that, I think we will move on to provide you with some of the resources to the links for our okay. Let's see. So applicants may find the following resources helpful in the development of the Antibias Education Grant Program application. So these were mentioned in previous slides, but we'd like to give you the hyperlinks to those now. So asset-based pedagogies focus on the strengths that diverse students bring to the classroom. CDE's asset-based pedagogy webpage may be found at www.cde.pv/PV/EE/asset-based pedagogies.ASP. The CDE's Supporting LGBTQ+ Students webpage includes instructional guidance, law, and policies for LEAs to support LGBTQ+ students. Find the webpage at www.cde.ca.gov/PD/EE/support/LGBTQ+ 2019 /. lgbtq.asp. The CDE Transformative SEL Competencies and Conditions Guidance Tool aim to build on and respond to the call from California's diverse interested parties to embed equity-focused transformative SEL in every learning and teaching context across the education system. Applicants may find this information at www.cde.ca/ci/tsel.asp. The QPLS serve as a foundation for the content, processes, and conditions essential to all educator professional learning over time. Visit www.cde.ca.gov/td/ps/qpls.asp to learn more. WestEd's Anti-Racist Evaluation Strategies, a guide for evaluation teams, contains strategies to conduct anti-racist evaluations and may be found at www.wested.org/WP-racist-evaluations-R10_final-ada.pdf. The Every Student Succeeds Act's definition of evidence-based practice can be found at www.congress.gov/114/PUBL95/PL-AW-114PUB-115.pdf. For additional information, you're encouraged to contact the Anti-Bias Education Grant Program team at antibiasgrants@cde.ca.gov. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.